Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, December 8th, 2025, and today we are finding our own agronomists talking about planting into compost mulch and looking at leaves as individuals. So let's do it. All right, lovely Monday to you all. I hope everyone has enjoyed a nice weekend and relaxing weekend or busy weekend or whatever your hopes were for the weekend. Mine was solid. Yesterday, the weather was actually nice enough for the first time in like 10 days or something to actually get some stuff done. So I took advantage and harvested a little bit of lettuce, cleaned up some things outside that needed cleaning up. Just, like that little stuff around the farm. I don't normally work on Sundays, but I just needed to get outside and move around. I think I talked about how stir crazy I get in the winters here, but between the dark, the cold, and the mud, I start to lose it a bit in the winters. Thus why I am often talking about and dreaming about my winter citrus farm somewhere warm and beachy. That is one thing about farming anything in the winter, though. You don't really get to choose when you do stuff in the wintertime unless you have the best infrastructure. You are very much at the mercy of the cold and the sun and sometimes the snow, of which we are getting even more right now as I record this. So good times there. That shouldn't slow anything down. If it's sunny one day for like even a few hours and the greens have thawed, that's your window, even if that window happens to be on a Saturday or a birthday or a Sunday. So winter growing does require a little bit more flexibility, which actually works out if you've been itching to get outside anyway. So yeah, totally normal job. All right, so continuing our mulch series through the end of the year, today I wanted to talk about what to expect when planting into compost mulch because it has become a popular growing technique. There are going to be a lot of new growers heading into their first seasons using compost as a mulch this year, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to just give you some basic things to think about or to expect. First, what I'm talking about, in case it's not clear, is mulching with a layer of compost and using it as a growing medium, what we call deep compost mulching, but what is also often referred to as like no dig. Basically, you put down a bunch of compost and you plant into it. That's pretty much what it is. Easy. But some things to keep in mind, just strictly in terms of production. First, your production is going to be highly dependent on the quality of compost that you are using, but also the state of the soil below. What I mean is that if the soil is heavy clay below the compost, it will eventually come around, but it may not immediately. What you may immediately get is a heavy, mucky compaction layer beneath your compost that can stop roots dead in their tracks and reduce your production in year one. A better approach for avoiding this is to broad fork or even perhaps till in some compost before setting up the deep compost beds, just to break that compacted soil up and bring it together with that compost. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if the soil is sand or just incredibly fast draining, then having enough moisture to grow good plants may be a bit of a challenge. Again, the beauty of the compost mulch is that worms and other critters will eventually meld the soil and compost layers beautifully, but at first there could be a deficit there, and that will make growing things difficult. Stuff, in other words, will be thirsty, and by stuff I mean your plants. More to that point, the compost itself can be quite dry. It's somewhat hydrophobic compost, especially like the thick mulchy ones. So especially in the drier times or on drier soils, having enough water can be a challenge for germinating crops, but also just establishing transplants. Drip tape can be massively underwhelming in deep compost mulch, so I recommend having some overhead options, depending on the crop, some sprinklers of some sort. That said, there are also a lot of things to like about planting into compost, not the least of which is just how incredibly freaking easy it is to do. It's fast, there are no weeds, or at least there shouldn't be. It's uncomplicated in that way. However, if you are in a warm, wet climate, as we talked about recently, expect the compost to slowly dissipate throughout the course of the season as microbes and just general weathering take their toll, which I should say take their toll is kind of an underrated phrase, like up there with sudden death in sports. I mean, is there a more evocative phrase in the world than sudden death? I love that. Solid stuff. Anyway, I obviously didn't bring up contamination or unfinished compost there because we've talked a lot about those over the course of this show. But the above are just a few things while we're on the subject of mulch still this month to keep in mind. And maybe the last one would be temperature. Compost is dark. It is going to get warmer than other things. So if you have a crop like, let's say, spinach that requires a lower germination temperature, as you get more into the spring, like that period when it starts to get pretty warm and pretty sunny, that is when the compost mulch is going to be harder to germinate stuff in than the soil. Anyway, what say you all? What were some surprises that you ran into, pleasant or not, when you first started growing with a compost mulch? Let us know. And otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll make like a tree and leaf because I'm a dad. BRB.
Hello, Growers Daily. New flower garden put in last summer. It's got some boxwood shrubs growing there. Supplementing with alfalfa hay cubes, rehydrated, and wood chips to form the in-ground bed there. And then way in the corner, you can see the raised beds we moved at the end of the growing season. Excited to see how they do in their new location next season. Catch you later. Bye.
Today's episode is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a proud supporter of Growers Daily. At Johnny's, they do more than sell seeds. They grow them. They trial them to see how they perform on Johnny's research farm in Maine and across the U.S. and Canada. Only the best varieties are added to their catalog and website. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seedling to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. JohnnySeeds.com. That's JohnnySeeds.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Robert, who asks, quote, Jesse, it's leaf season. Are some leaves better than others? Oak leaves take longer to break down versus something like linden, magnolia, or dogwood leaves. Mow it up, dump it on for a good fall/winter cover to protect soil. Spring comes, scrape it off, and throw it in compost pile. Wash, rinse, repeat. Rob, end quote. All right, Rob, good question, and I'm not going to bury the lead too much here. By and large, a leaf is a leaf. What I mean is that if you have access to basically any leaf, according to the science, it's going to be fine or really great for the soil or the compost pile, assuming it's not contaminated, of course. There are a lot of common myths in this regard, but if you've got a giant pile of leaves of any type, you've got a gold mine of carbon and nutrients. This even applies to things like pine needles or pine straw, quote unquote, which is often said to acidify the soil because the needles themselves are acidic, but it just really doesn't pan out that way in practice. That is a common garden myth. According to the research, it doesn't really acidify the soil, at least not in any meaningful capacity. As for certain leaves taking longer than other leaves to decompose, that can happen to some extent. Some leaves are just more substantial than others, like certain oaks, to use your example. They are simply more robust, have more lignum material, etc. However, if they are chopped up, let's say like with a mower, that will dramatically speed up the decomposition itself. As I often point out, the bigger something is, the less surface area it has, meaning the less space for microbes to attack it. This is one way to analogize it. Think of it like a Rubik's Cube. If you had a giant Rubik's Cube with room enough for one person to stand on each square, you could get 54 people on there. If you took the Rubik's Cube apart, though, breaking it into its constituent little cubes, you would have 27 cubes with 6 standing spaces each. That would equal enough square spaces for 162 people to stand with 6 spaces on each cube. In other words, smaller equals more space, more surface area, and thus faster decomposition. Of course, if you can mix leaves together for diversity's sake, that is always going to be preferred, just because different leaves will bring in different nutrients. That will bring in also different fungi, different bacteria. If you have a bulk of one type of leaf, something extreme like pine needles, then mix it with something nitrogenous to kickstart that decomposition and pH balancing process. And if you've got other leaves that you can mix in there, go for that too. Water, ambient temperature, and time will also have their say in how fast these things decompose as well. Someone in a very cold, dry climate will find that the leaves are slower to break down than someone in a wet, humid climate where fungi and decomposition thrive. So for me, I say take whatever leaves that you can get, mix them together if possible, and of course, don't work raw leaves into the soil. That will just, tie up nitrogen no matter what tree it came from. Perhaps avoid leaves from golf courses or perhaps, like conventional orchards if possible, just for the contamination risks. But generally speaking, contamination is a low risk in leaves, so that's nice. The one thing that you can get, depending on how they were collected, is weed seed. So if possible, it is nice to compost them. Anyway, you are definitely right, though. It is leaf season. The holidays, indeed. All right, listeners, let us know your thoughts or experiences with specific leaf varieties. I do not have a monopoly on all the good advice or good ideas or good answers, so chime in a little bit. Otherwise, it's break time, followed by finding an agronomist time. That should be fun. Be right back. All right, so a little update on our winter lettuce. I started these maybe 3 weeks ago, and they're doing pretty well. But one of the things about lettuce in the winter at this time of year is you can see it gets a little bit leggy. And a big part of that is that you don't have any sunlight because there's snow on the roof of the greenhouse. We don't add any supplemental light, so that isn't helping. And also we have these little heating cables, so when it drops below, I think it's 32 degrees, there's a little thermostat in these heating cables, and it heats it up. But if they're not getting the sunlight they need and they're getting the heat they need, then they're getting a little leggy, which isn't a dance move, but it should be. Yep.
Hey friends, this is my garden and my little growing space. I call it my sprout house. My dad built it for me this spring. I've got to show off the ceiling real quick. My daughter painted this and it's my favorite thing ever. I'm trying to grow some cooler weather things like kale in the south facing windows, so wish me luck with my winter project. And we just got our first snowfall this morning, which I thought was really lovely.
Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. Farmers who partnered with Farmhand say they grew an average of 63% this year because it's more than software. Farmhand is your business coach and assistant, helping to sell out, save time, and grow smarter with real data from real farms, shaping websites that convert, campaigns that sell, and fulfillment systems that run smoothly. Curious what that looks like? Meet the founder, Ari, at farmhand.partners/no-till and see the same insights and support the fastest growing farms rely on every week. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. Today's episode is also brought to you by FarmRaise. Still struggling with your balance sheet? Your lender's asking for a balance sheet and you're stuck with a spreadsheet mess or guessing your numbers? FarmRaise Tracks takes the stress out of farm finance. With one click, you can generate an accurate, up-to-date balance sheet that shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. No accounting degree required. You'll be ready for loan applications, tax season, or just a clearer picture of where your farm stands. Join thousands of farmers using Tracks to build stronger businesses. Get 20% off with code NOTIL20 at farmraise.com for the lifetime of your membership. All right, back to the show. All right, because I'm a bit behind on Patreon questions, as happens every few months or so, I thought I would catch up this week a bit and take a couple extras. So our second Patreon question of the day is a good one from Deep Hollow Farm, who writes, quote, "Hello, on the show you often mention consulting with an agronomist when making decisions about soil fertility, amendment applications, and the like. I wanted to ask how one would go about finding an agronomist to work with. A quick online search yielded no real leads for finding one near our farm in Connecticut. Thanks for any tips you can provide," end quote. All right, I love this question. It's actually not one anyone has ever asked here before that I can think of, and I love that, especially because I feel like I also have some decent answers for you. First, wherever you send your soil sample, provided it's not an extension service, will likely have an agronomist or multiple agronomists on staff who can assist you for an added fee to the soil test, or they can recommend someone to you. That's an easy place to start, and probably as much as most people will need, at least in the very beginning of their farms. There are also companies like Advancing Eco Agriculture, or AEA, who listeners will recognize as John Kemp's company, who offer agronomic services. Another place to find an agronomist, perhaps in a more regional sense too, would be at a farm conference, or like at the trade shows. There's often, several soil testing companies and such set up. They would be able to help you or guide you in the right direction, but also sometimes they will be, like presenting there, and you can learn a little bit from them about your region. Your extension agent may also be able to point you in the direction of some more small scale minded, agronomists to help. There are also websites who will help you do your soil amendment calculations for you. Basically enter your soil test results and it will spit out the soil recommendations, sort of like a digital agronomist, I guess. And I know there are a few people working on sites that are basically like AI agronomists, though how I feel about that whole thing. National agronomists exist too, like ones that will fly all over the country and go to your farm. But unless you are doing this, like farm thing on a significant scale and every square foot needs to be maximized to the nth degree, like it should be in a high production agriculture system, the price might be hard to justify for those like national folks. That said, I don't know what they charge, so perhaps it's not so bad for a small consult. And also just speak with other growers in the area, maybe at the farmer's market, and see what they think or who they use. There may be someone flying under the radar worth looking into who just works for the university or something like that. Anyway, who do you all use? Where did you find them? Let us know. Otherwise, we're done for this Monday, y'all. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations, your end of the year type, are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That is an easy way to help us out. enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Send her a huge thank you for how much she just keeps this whole no-till growers thing running. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for everything in the world, absolutely everything. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. This mug I got from my grandmother. It's maybe one of the coolest mugs I've ever seen. Pick up a hat or a copy of the Living Soil Handbook at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of December, you get a shout out in the show. So big shout outs today to Allison Barkman. Allison Barkman. Shouts to Allison for supporting our work. And Allison will be rewarded with starting off our story of the week. All right, so this story is going to be about a kid named Sleeves. That's not his real name, obviously. It's just what his friends called him because when he, like whenever he had his druthers and it wasn't too cold, he never wore shirts with sleeves. Anyway, Sleeves had a dream, not like an actual dream, like a goal, and not a typical one for an 11-year-old. Only a dream that someone who was cool with people calling him Sleeves would have. Sleeves wanted to be a gardener. His parents, of course, were pretty fine with whatever Sleeves wanted to be, but gardener was going to be a tough one considering they lived in New York City. However, Sleeves was a resourceful kid and found his own path to gardening, and that is for tomorrow on Rolling Up Your Sleeves. I don't know. Sounds like Sleeves kind of gets hurt in this one. I don't think that happens. We'll find out, though. Thanks for watching and/or listening. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.